Gabriella Whitmore wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock. 5 minutes until class began. The scent of freshly chopped basil and sizzling garlic filled the air, mixing with the light chatter of her students as they settled in. "All right, everyone," she called, clapping her hands. "Today we're making homemade pasta from scratch, no store-bought shortcuts." A groan came from the back of the class, but it was followed by laughter. Gabriella grinned, already knowing who it was. Everett Palmer. He was her most eager student despite being completely hopeless in the kitchen. Tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly charming, he had a way of making even a disastrous attempt at cooking seem entertaining. Every class he asked endless questions, his deep voice filled with curiosity. And every class he failed spectacularly, burning sauces or over-kneading dough. But there was something so endearing about him, his determination, his easy smile that made him her favorite student. Gabriella made her way over to his station, where he was staring at the pile of flour and eggs in front of him as if they were an unsolvable puzzle. "Everett," she teased, leaning against the counter, "please tell me you at least know how to crack an egg." His blue eyes met hers, twinkling with amusement. "I know how," he said, picking up an egg, "but whether or not it ends up in the bowl is another story." Gabriella laughed. "Let's try anyway." Everett cracked the egg too hard. It shattered, sending bits of shell into the flour. "Impressive," Gabriella said dryly. Everett ran a hand through his dark hair, looking sheepish. "I swear I'm good at a lot of things, cooking just isn't one of them." "And yet you keep coming back," she pointed out, arching a brow. He grinned. Maybe I enjoy the challenge, or maybe he enjoyed spending time with her, but she dismissed the thought before it could settle. The rest of the class passed in a blur of laughter and flour-dusted chaos. By the end, Everett's pasta was a disaster, uneven, too thick, and somehow sticking to the counter like glue. "How do you do it?" Gabriella marveled, shaking her head. "Raw talent," Everett said, looking entirely unbothered. She rolled her eyes. "You need help, Palmer, serious help." "Then I guess I'll have to keep coming to class until I master it," he said, his voice softer now. There was something in the way he looked at her, something warm, something lingering. Gabriella's heart did a little flip, but she quickly pushed it aside. "Keep practicing," she said, stepping back. "Someday you might just surprise me." Everett chuckled. "That's the plan, Gabriella." As the students packed up, she caught Everett lingering by the door. He hesitated for a moment before turning back to her. "Dinner," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What about it?" "Let me take you to dinner," he said, his expression unreadable. "As a thank you for all the patience you've had with me." Gabriella hesitated. It was tempting. Everett was undeniably charming, but he was a student, and she had a rule about dating students. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I don't date my students." Everett didn't look surprised, but a small smirk played at his lips. "Good thing I'm not technically a student, I'm just a guy taking a cooking class." She laughed. "Nice try." He held up his hands in surrender. All right, I'll keep practicing. But one day I'll make you the perfect pasta dish, and when that day comes, you'll owe me dinner." Gabriella shook her head, smiling despite herself. "We'll see about that." As Everett walked out, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that he wasn't just another student. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite place. Little did she know, Everett Palmer wasn't just a man struggling to make pasta. He was a billionaire. And he was hopelessly in love with her. Gabriella stood at the counter of her cooking studio, wiping down the marble surface as the last of her students filtered out. The evening's class had been eventful, as always, but her mind kept circling back to Everett. The way he had lingered at the door, the way he had asked her to dinner with that quiet confidence. She exhaled, willing herself to push the thought aside. It wasn't the first time a student had flirted with her, but Everett was different. He wasn't just charming, he was comfortable, like he belonged in her space, despite his complete lack of culinary skill. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, expecting one of her students to have forgotten something, but instead, Everett stood there, relaxed as ever, holding a small paper bag. "I know what you're thinking," he said before she could speak. but I'm not here to ask you to dinner again." "Not yet, anyway." She crossed her arms, amusement flickering in her expression. "Then why are you here?" Everett stepped inside, placing the bag on the counter. "I attempted to make pasta on my own today. Thought you might want to judge my progress." Gabriella arched an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "You cooked, without supervision." He pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "I'm not completely hopeless." She pulled the bag open, peeking inside. The pasta was unexpected. Some pieces were oddly shaped, others too thick, and it was obvious the sauce had separated. She bit her lip, trying not to laugh. Everett watched her reaction carefully. "Be honest." Gabriella lifted a particularly unfortunate-looking noodle. She hesitated, meeting his gaze. "It's ambitious." A chuckle rumbled from his chest. "That bad, huh?" She softened. "You get points for effort, and for not setting your kitchen on fire." "Progress," he mused. "So what's my next step?" Gabriella looked at him, considering. Most students took their lessons and went home until the next session, but Everett was different. He wanted to improve not just in cooking, but in something else. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. After a beat, she grabbed an apron from the hook and tossed it at him. "You're staying." His eyebrows lifted. "Right now. If you're serious about learning, I'll give you a private lesson, but I'm not going easy on you." Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and unreadable. "Deal?" She guided him through the steps again, this time slowing down, making sure he understood why things worked rather than just following a recipe. He listened intently, his usual carefree demeanor replaced with something more focused. At one point, his hand brushed hers as he reached for a knife, and she felt a jolt of awareness shoot through her. She pulled back, clearing her throat. Everett didn't comment on it, but his gaze lingered on her for a beat too long before he turned back to the dough. An hour later, they stood side by side, staring at the finished dish. Everett leaned in slightly, inspecting his work. "This actually looks edible," he admitted. Gabriella nudged his arm. "Now taste it." He twirled a forkful of pasta and took a bite, his brows lifted in surprise. "Not bad." She waited. He chewed thoughtfully before conceding. "Okay, actually good." Gabriella grinned. "Told you, you just needed the right teacher." Everett turned to her, something unreadable in his gaze. "I think I've needed the right person for a lot of things." A strange warmth spread through her chest, but she ignored it, stepping back. "All right, lesson over." Everett watched her for a moment before nodding. "Thank you, Gabriella." She didn't know why, but the way he said her name felt different, heavier. As he gathered his things, she glanced at him. "Same time next week." Everett hesitated before answering. "Actually, I might be out of town for a few days." That caught her off guard. He never missed a class. "Business?" He nodded. "Something like that." Gabriella tilted her head, curious. She had never asked what he did for a living, assuming he was just another professional looking for a hobby. But now she wondered. Everett seemed to sense the question forming and gave her a small, knowing look. "I'll be back before you know it." And with that, he walked out, leaving Gabriella more intrigued than ever. Gabriella hadn't expected Everett's absence to affect her. But as the days passed, she caught herself looking toward the door at the beginning of each class, half expecting him to stroll in late, flashing that easy grin of his. She told herself it was just routine. He had been a constant presence in her classes, and now that he was gone, the space he left behind was simply noticeable. That was all. At least, that's what she tried to believe. By the fourth day, she busied herself with paperwork in her office, determined to shake the ridiculous awareness of his absence. She had real concerns balancing her business expenses, preparing for next month's advanced class, and making sure her students left her studio having actually learned something. She didn't have time to wonder about Everett Palmer. But then her assistant, Clara, poked her head into the office. "There's a delivery for you," Clara said, eyes alight with curiosity. Gabriella looked up, confused. "A delivery?" Clara stepped aside, and a man in a crisp black suit entered, carrying a sleek black velvet box. "This is for Miss Whitmore," he announced, setting it carefully on the desk in front of her. Gabriella hesitated, glancing at Clara, who gave her an eager nod. Reluctantly, she lifted the lid. Inside lay an elegant chef's knife, its handle carved from polished wood, the blade engraved with delicate script. She traced the lettering with her fingers, reading it aloud. "For the best teacher I know, Everett." A warmth spread through her chest, and she swallowed hard. Clara leaned in, whispering, "You have an admirer." Gabriella ignored her, turning to the delivery man. "Who sent this?" The man gave a polite nod. "Mr. Palmer." Her breath hitched slightly. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed sent a strange, unsteady thrill through her. "Everett." She ran her fingers lightly over the handle before snapping the lid shut. "Tell him I said thank you." The man inclined his head and left without another word. Clara practically vibrated with excitement. "Gabby, a man sends you a custom engraved knife." "That's not a normal thank you gift," Gabriella exhaled. "It's Everett, he's hopelessly into you," Clara finished, grinning. Gabriella shook her head, but she didn't argue, because deep down she knew Clara was right. 2 days later, Everett returned. Gabriella was setting up ingredients for the evening's class when she felt the undeniable presence of someone standing just behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You're late," she said, keeping her focus on the cutting board. Everett stepped closer, his voice carrying that familiar warmth. "I didn't realize there was a deadline." She glanced up, taking in the sight of him. He looked the same, yet different. A little wearier around the edges, like he hadn't slept enough, but his eyes still held that teasing glint. "I take my students' attendance very seriously," she said. He exhaled a quiet chuckle. "I'll make it up to you." Gabriella arched a brow. "With another engraved knife." His lips quirked. "You got it then," she nodded. "It was unnecessary." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I wanted to." Something about the way he said it made her pulse quicken. She turned back to the counter, determined to regain control of the moment. "If you're serious about making it up to me, you can start by actually learning something tonight." Everett leaned against the counter, watching her. "You always this tough on your favorite student." She froze for a fraction of a second before resuming her chopping. "Who said you were my favorite?" he chuckled. "You didn't deny it." Gabriella shook her head, fighting a smile. "Get your apron, Palmer." As the class progressed, Everett was more focused than she had ever seen him. He followed instructions carefully, listening without his usual playful distractions. It was unexpected. At the end of the lesson, while the other students packed up, Everett remained at his station, waiting as Gabriella approached. "All right," she said, glancing at his plate. "Not bad." "You might actually be learning something." Everett tilted his head. "Are you proud of me, Gabriella?" She sighed, exasperated. "Don't ruin the moment." A slow grin spread across his face. "I wouldn't dare." She rolled her eyes but couldn't help the warmth creeping up her neck. As she moved to leave, Everett's voice stopped her. "Dinner." Gabriella turned, giving him a pointed look. "Everett, this time it's not about repaying a favor," he said simply. "I just want to have dinner with you." A pause settled between them. She knew what he was really asking. And against every rule she had set for herself, she found herself hesitating. Everett didn't push, he merely watched, waiting. Finally, she exhaled. "One dinner." A satisfied gleam entered his gaze. "One dinner." But even as she said it, Gabriella knew one dinner wouldn't be enough. Gabriella walked into the restaurant, smoothing her hands over her dress as she scanned the elegant dining room. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the pristine white tablecloths, and soft music hummed in the background. It was the kind of place reserved for the elite, the kind of place she wouldn't normally find herself in. Then she saw him. Everett stood near a private corner table, his presence effortlessly commanding. He had changed from his usual casual attire into a tailored suit, the crisp lines emphasizing his broad shoulders. The moment their eyes met, something deep in her chest tightened. "You came," he said, as if he hadn't been entirely sure she would. Gabriella stepped forward. "I said I would." Everett pulled out a chair for her, and she hesitated for half a second before sitting. The gesture was old-fashioned, but somehow, coming from him, it felt natural. As he took his own seat, a waiter appeared, filling their glasses with a deep red wine. Gabriella glanced at the menu, her eyes widening slightly at the prices. "I should warn you," she said, setting it down. "I don't belong in places like this." Everett leaned back slightly, studying her. "Who decides where you belong?" she exhaled, shaking her head. "You know what I mean. This is your world, not mine." He tilted his head, considering her words. "I think you'd be surprised." Gabriella hesitated, caught off guard by the quiet certainty in his voice. Before she could respond, the waiter returned, and Everett ordered for both of them with an ease that suggested he had been here countless times. As the waiter left, Gabriella looked at him curiously. "So what do you do, Everett?" For a moment he only watched her as if deciding how much to reveal, then he leaned forward slightly. "I run a company." She arched a brow. "A company?" His lips quirked in amusement. "A few, actually." Something in the way he said it made her stomach flip. She had always assumed he was successful, but there was something more to it, something unspoken. "How big are we talking?" she asked. Everett took a sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving hers. "Big enough." Gabriella narrowed her eyes slightly. "That's vague," he exhaled, setting his glass down. "Gabriella, do you remember when you asked why I kept coming to your class?" She nodded slowly. "I could have hired a private chef to teach me. I could have learned in a kitchen twice the size of your entire studio. But I didn't want that." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. "I wanted to be there," he continued. "With you," Gabriella swallowed, her fingers tightening slightly around the stem of her glass. "Everett, I own Palmer Industries," he said, cutting through whatever protest she had been about to make. Her breath stalled. Palmer Industries. The name echoed in her mind, familiar from news articles, financial reports, and whispered conversations about one of the most powerful business empires in the world. She stared at him, her thoughts racing. "You're telling me you're a billionaire," he finished for her. "Yes," Gabriella sat back, gripping the edge of the table. "And you didn't think to mention this before." Everett's expression softened. "Would it have changed anything?" She let out a disbelieving laugh. "Of course it would have changed things." "Everett, she ran a hand through her hair, trying to process it. "I thought you were just some guy trying to learn how to cook." "I was," he said simply. "I still am." She shook her head, exhaling sharply. "But you're also one of the most powerful men in the country." He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. "I didn't come to your class because of who I am out there. I came because of who I am with you." Gabriella stared at the place where their hands nearly touched, her heart pounding. "I wasn't trying to deceive you," Everett said quietly. I didn't want my name to be the reason you saw me differently." She looked up, her chest tightening. "And now," he said, his voice steady, "I need you to tell me if this changes everything for you." Gabriella searched his face, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes, and for all the shock, all the disbelief, one truth remained: he was still Everett. Still the man who showed up to her classes despite being hopeless in the kitchen. Still the man who listened, who learned, who made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Her fingers curled slightly, brushing against his. "I don't know what this means," she admitted. Everett exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Then let's figure it out together." A slow warmth spread through her, and for the first time since walking into the restaurant, she allowed herself to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, she could. Gabriella sat in Everett's car, the city lights blurring past as they wove through the streets. The restaurant had been a dreamlike experience, but now, reality was settling in. She was sitting beside a man she thought she knew, only to realize he was someone entirely different, or was he? Everett's hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, his gaze steady as he maneuvered through the roads. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was thick with unspoken thoughts. "You haven't said much since dinner," Everett noted, his voice calm but searching. Gabriella turned her head, watching him in the dim glow of the dashboard. "I don't know what to say." "You're allowed to be upset," he offered. "I'm not upset," she admitted. "I'm just adjusting." Everett exhaled through his nose, nodding slightly. "I get that." The car slowed as they approached her apartment building. He pulled up to the curb, shifting into park but making no move to turn off the engine. Gabriella hesitated, her fingers curling around the strap of her purse. "So what now?" Everett tilted his head slightly. "That's up to you." She searched his face, looking for any sign of expectation, but all she found was patience. He was giving her space, letting her decide what this revelation meant for them. And that, more than anything, made her feel steady again. Gabriella reached for the door handle but paused. "This doesn't change the fact that you're still a disaster in the kitchen." A slow smile pulled at Everett's lips. "Then I guess I have no choice but to keep coming to class." She shook her head, amused despite everything. "See you next week, Palmer." As she stepped out of the car and into the cool night air, she felt his gaze on her until she disappeared into the building. The following week, Everett arrived at the studio just as class was beginning. Gabriella had half expected him to be distant, to act as if nothing had changed, but as he walked in, he greeted her with the same easy warmth as always. "Miss me?" he teased, setting his things down at his usual station. Gabriella rolled her eyes. "Let's see if your cooking has improved first." Throughout the class, she watched him carefully. There was no shift in his demeanor, no indication that their conversation had unsettled him. If anything, he seemed more focused, more determined than before. When the session ended, Everett lingered, waiting until the last student had filtered out before approaching her. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Gabriella narrowed her eyes. "If it's another engraved knife, I might start thinking you're trying to bribe me." Everett chuckled, shaking his head as he pulled out a small envelope. "No knives this time, just this." Curious, she took the envelope and opened it, her breath catching as she unfolded the paper inside. It was a reservation one for a private cooking class. Except, this time she wouldn't be the one teaching. She looked up at him, stunned. "You booked a lesson." Everett leaned against the counter, watching her reaction. "I figured if I'm going to be serious about learning, I should get better instruction." Gabriella crossed her arms. "So you're ditching my class?" His lips twitched. "Not a chance, but I figured you might want to come with me." She blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to take the class with you?" "Cooking has always been your world," Everett said simply. "I thought it might be nice to experience it together, just us. No students, no distractions." Gabriella stared at him, her pulse quickening. It wasn't just about the lesson. It was about the effort, the thought behind it. She tapped the paper against her palm. "All right, Palmer, let's see if a professional can fix what I clearly failed to." Everett grinned. "I like my chances." The private class was unlike anything Gabriella had expected. The instructor was a well-known chef, the kind of teacher she would have dreamed of learning from when she was first starting out. Everett, for all his charm, was still a mess in the kitchen. But this time, instead of leading the lesson, Gabriella found herself beside him, guiding him through each step with a patience she hadn't realized she had. At one point he turned to her, flour dusted across his hands, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "I like this," she raised an eyebrow. The cooking, he confirmed, "but mostly I like doing this with you." Gabriella felt something shift inside her, something undeniable. Maybe it didn't matter that he was a billionaire. Maybe it didn't matter that their worlds had once seemed so different. Because here, in this moment, they were just two people standing side by side, learning together. And that, she realized, was all that truly mattered. Everett stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, gazing out over the glittering city skyline. The evening air was cool enough to be refreshing but not enough to chase them indoors. The private cooking class had been an unexpected revelation, and now, as they stood together beneath a sky littered with stars, he felt something settle in his chest, something certain, undeniable. Gabriella leaned against the railing beside him, her hair shifting with the breeze. She had flour on her wrist, a remnant of their earlier chaos in the kitchen, and the sight of it made Everett smile. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met, wasn't impressed by wealth, wasn't intimidated by his name. She challenged him, met him on equal ground, and somehow, without either, she had become someone he couldn't imagine walking away from. He turned slightly, watching her. "You never told me," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Why you started cooking?" Gabriella glanced at him, surprised by the question. She hesitated, tapping her fingers lightly against the railing before exhaling. "My mother owned a small bakery when I was a kid." A soft smile touched her lips, touched with something distant, something bittersweet. "It wasn't anything fancy, just a hole-in-the-wall place, but it was home. I spent most of my childhood covered in flour, watching her create magic out of sugar and butter." Everett listened, taking in every word. "When she got sick," Gabriella continued, her voice quieter now, "we had to close the bakery. After she passed, I promised myself that I would keep that magic alive in some way." She gestured vaguely. "So here I am." Everett let the silence stretch between them, absorbing the weight of what she had shared. Wasn't just a career to her, it was a legacy, a promise, a piece of her past she refused to let fade. "You built something incredible," he said finally. "She would be proud of you." Gabriella looked at him then, and for a moment, Everett thought nothing else existed except the way she held his gaze, steady and searching. "I hope so," she murmured. Ever fell into a comfortable lull, the hum of the city below filling the space between them. Then Gabriella turned to him till, "What about you?" she asked. "Why cooking?" Everett let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "If I'm being honest, I was never interested in learning how to. Not until," he catching himself, but Gabriella had already caught the shift in his tone. "Not until what?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second before meeting her gaze head. "Not until you." Gabriella stilled. Everett took a step closer, closing the space between them. "I walked into that class expecting nothing more than an amusing distraction. But then I met you." His voice was steady, certain. "And suddenly it wasn't about it was about spending time with you, learning from you, watching you light up whenever you talked about your craft." Gabriella's breath hitched slightly, but she made no move. "I tried to fight it," Everett admitted. "Told myself it was just curiosity. But then I found myself thinking about you outside of class, looking forward to the next time I'd see you." He exhaled, running a hand through his. "And now, standing here, I know one thing for sure." Gabriella swallowed, her pulse hammering. "What's that?" "That I don't want this to be temporary," Everett said, voice raw with honesty. "I don't want to walk with you to end when the class does. I want more." Gabriella's heart pounded against her ribs, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had spent so long keeping her walls up, convincing herself that she didn't need time for distractions, for relationships that might pull her away from her dreams. But Everett, he wasn't a distraction. He was something more, something steady, something she had never expected but couldn't ignore. She exhaled slowly, then reached up, brushing the remnants of flour from his sleeve. "You're a terrible mess," she murmured, voice. Everett chuckled. "And yet here you are." Gabriella met his gaze, something shifting in her, something falling into place. "Yeah," she said softly. "Here I am." Everett didn't hesitate. He closed the last of the space between them, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that tasted like flour and wine and something entirely new. And in that moment, Gabriella knew. This wasn't just a moment. This was the start of something real. Months later, Everett stood at the entrance of Gabriella's new studio, watching as she moved through the space with a sense of purpose. The expansion had been a dream of hers, and now, thanks to a little help from Everett's connections and her own relentless determination, it was finally a reality. You had proposed to her in the very same kitchen where they had first stood together, the place where she had first taught him how to make pasta. It had been simple, intimate, just the two surrounded by the thing that had brought them together. And when she had said yes, Everett had known without a doubt that he had found his forever. Now, as he watched her, he felt that same certainty settle in his chest. Gabriella turned, catching him staring. "What?" Everett shook his head, stepping forward. "Just admiring my wife." Gabriella rolled her eyes, but there was a smile playing at her lips. "You realize you're still not any better at cooking, right?" Everett grinned, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Good thing I married the best chef I know." Gabriella laughed, leaning into him. And there, in the heart of the place they had built together, they knew one thing for sure. Their story, their love, was only just beginning.